Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are back talking to professors around America about important topics related to society. Today, we're talking to Professor Josef Chytry.
Chytry, Chytry.
Chytry. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Josef Chytry. He just wrote the new book, Cosmic California, towards Jose Vasconcelos' Cosmic Race and its Aesthetic Era. Professor Chytry is the author of Cosmotheism, The Cytherean Cycle, Mountain of Paradise, Reflections on the Emergence of Greater California as a World Civilization. That's the one that I met him with. And The Aesthetic State. He's founding director of the Center for Aesthetics and Politics at the California College of the Arts, San Francisco, as well as founding managing editor of the Oxford University Press Journal, Industrial and Corporate Change, at the Haas School of Business, University of California, Berkeley. He was also a Humboldt postdoctoral fellow in philosophy at the University of Tübingen and received his doctorate in philosophy and politics and the history of ideas from the University of Oxford, one of the most famous English universities, one of the most famous universities in the world. His present project is What is a Californian? There's a little bit of a background. We covered that already. He has some lectures regularly in philosophy at Stanford University Continuing Studies. He's the advisor to the Berkeley Magazine Dispatches, and he's also received his BA in International Relations from George Washington University. That's a really good university for that. A Master in International Affairs from Columbia University and a Doctor of Philosophy and Politics and History of Ideas from the University of Oxford. He's also written books on California before, although California is regarded often as a regional civilization within the United States of America. This article argues that California justifies being considered a major civilization in itself. That's California civilization beyond the United States of America. Also, California Irredenta. Kevin Starr's Golden Dreams is the culmination to some 40 years of scholarship on the unfolding theme of a California dream, that imaginal component to the growth of the self-identity and increasing international economic power of the most populous state in the American Union. Kevin Starr is one of the most famous historians of California history. And that leads us to this book here, California History. And this is a cover of Bloody Island, I think something that happened on May 30th, 1942. And this is the book that we're going to be discovering, Cosmic California, towards Jose Vasconcelos' Cosmic Race and its Aesthetic Era, which is inspired by a work that I and many educated Latinos read, The Cosmic Race, or La Raza Cósmica by Jose Vasconcelos. Before we get into that, let's check in. Professor, how do we do? Is there anything on your background we need to correct or change, or is there something you wanted to highlight I didn't cover?
Yeah, just to clarify, the piece that you're referring to, Cosmic California, actually comes up in California History Magazine. So it's a long extended article rather than a book in itself. And California History Magazine is a very famous and prestigious magazine in terms of California history. So the cover that you just read is part of the ongoing effort by the magazine to also deal with problems and crises that the indigenous Californians faced. And of course, in some cases, we even have to use a word like genocide. So it's a very important magazine, and I'm very, very honored to contribute to it. I've contributed a few times, and this is the most recent one, which just came out in the winter.
I've approached the University of California Press. It's very hard to get published there. It's a very distinguished accomplishment to do that. And yes, absolutely. This is a high order book, and it deserves to be recognized at those levels. What is the book about? Before I read the description and get to the meat and potatoes. And so the book is actually in California History here.
No, it's an article, not a book in itself. It's an
article.
Cosmic California, yeah. And so your question is, what is it about?
Yeah, before I read this, how would you describe it to somebody? In my famous question, an elevator speech. You have 2 to 3 minutes. You met a random person. what would you tell them this book is about so they'd be intrigued to want to read it more?
Yeah. Well, I myself didn't know about Jose Vasconcelos. It was more like a long article called, as you say, La Raza Cosmica that came out in 1925. I was alerted to it by a colleague, Jerwin de Wolf, who wrote an article on Vasconcelos, and it struck me as a fascinating concept. So I went more into it. And the basic concept, as you know probably better than I, is that Jose Vasconcelos, who was a very well known, not just thinker, very first rate thinker, wide ranging thinker in terms of different traditions, but also a person of statecraft, an important political figure in the 1920s and even after that, came up with this idea that there are five, I guess you would say, five attempts to create societies. Four of them were ruled by some form of domination. But the fifth one, the fifth race, is going to be one that's free of domination. And it goes with a period that he called the aesthetic era. He saw three eras: an early era, sort of a political era, and then this aesthetic era. And in that era, there would be this fifth so-called race, which would finally recognize that all people need to come together in union, in a mestatie, right? That we should all come together as a single people and create, without any restrictions, the fact that we're human beings. That was the core of his idea. I think it had a very strong impact, as you, of course, know, throughout succeeding generations among people of La Raza
Oh, yeah.
during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it had a widespread influence. There was a lot of criticism of aspects of it, but I wholeheartedly like the spirit of it. And I tried to make the argument in this article that although Vasconcelos was aiming for something like a Latin American future, he actually talked a lot about the Amazon, for example. My own feeling was that California is the best candidate for the cosmic race. I'm not saying, now this is important, I'm not saying it is the cosmic race, I'm saying it's the best candidate. And my argument in this article was that it's based on two features. One, that it's still you might say, the true mixed people of any state in the Union, with Texas and New York behind. And second, it is actually the beneficiary and one of the promulgators of the aesthetic era from the point of view of the study of industrial revolutions. The position on industrial revolutions by political economists is that we're now entering into what some people call the revolution of imagination, the digitality that we're all experiencing. And this is
Oh,
spreading much more rapidly the possibilities of imagination. The two, if you bring them together, are really California together. We're at the vanguard of both. We're the most multicultural and we're the most, in this sense, aesthetic as far as this age of imagination supposedly coming into being. And so that's my argument. We're the best candidate.
could not agree more. That's why I found this fascinating. I totally agree. I wrote a book, California's Next Century 2.0, a while back, and I argued something similar that
Uh-huh.
we're the most diverse place in the world. When you talk to scientists and you go on diversity, they go off genetics or language, and then they point to Papua New Guinea and they go, well, there's 1,000 different tribes with technically different DNA. Yeah, but it's one island full of a bunch of tribes that are very similar to each other with languages similar to each other. That's the scientific definition of diversity. I always look at it, where are you having people from Asia, Japan, China, Armenia, Mexico, El Salvador, coming together. That's how I view diversity, because
Me too.
that's so when you look at it that way, I think California is the most diverse. I've heard an argument about Houston, but uh, Houston's only been recently, and it's only one city. Whereas I like to say I'm in the backwater part of California, and we've had Armenians and Japanese and Jewish people and Chinese for 100 years here. So we're as diverse as like Houston was a century ago. Um, it's kind of new to them. It's not new to us. The highest rate of interracial children born in America is in Sacramento. It's been that way for like the last 10, 20 years. So
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, we do diversity. Not perfectly, of course. There's problems. Not saying that, but I would agree with you. We are one of the best candidates for everyone a place where all the different people come together, like we were talking about before the show on Alameda Island. And there are some great examples of integration. Let me read the description, if I may. Um, One of the more controversial themes in contemporary readings of race is the Mexican author Jose Vasconcelos' 1925 call for cosmic race, Raza Cosmica, to transcend all prior races in the course of the inauguration of aesthetic era aesthetica and human evolution. Although his language was later picked up by Chicano celebrants of La Raza and has received a variety of endorsements and critiques within a burgeoning literature comprising Latino critical race theory, no suggestion that contemporary California civilization may be the best compelling candidate for Vasconcelos' project has yet been essayed. Carefully analyzing Vasconcelos' arguments, this article exposes important shortcomings in his belief on the behalf of the future Latin American race, clarifying the failure of his political efforts to redirect Mexican revolutionary politics in the 1920s, and exposing the bankruptcy of his later flirtation with fascism. Um, this article takes up the most promising feature of Vasconcelos' arguments, namely his advocacy of mingling all races, mestizaje, to sponsor contemporary California's containing key features of that particular vision. Uh, oh, wow, yeah, Oaxaca. Okay. Um, what inspired you to write this book? Why did you, this is my classic standard question. Why did you write this book and why did you write it now? And when did you start thinking about this? What inspired you to do it? And why was now the right time?
I don't know about the right time. I work according to inspirations. As I say, my colleague Jerwin DeWolf brought up Vasconcelos in the first place, and I was ready to jump on it because it opened up all sorts of dimensions that I've been working with ever since I wrote my book, Mountain of Paradise, on the idea of California as, in fact, a greater civilization, which I hold even more firmly today. So I wanted us to direct ourselves towards the kind of really redemptive role that we have to play as Californians. And I thought that the whole Vasconcelos argument of cosmic race was just perfect for that purpose. And I guess you could say it comes at the right time because here we go again into the 2024 election, as we were discussing earlier. And there are some very important factors and considerations at play as we'll see how this thing unfolds. And in all of that, I think, as you've probably noticed, I'm sure, I noticed that the other party, from the point of view of the future, has severely attacked California, particularly San Francisco and Oakland, trying to make the argument that the other side ends up in the kind of conditions that are troubling, are problematic, have to be dealt with without any question by Californians in these two places, and conveniently or overlooking that they're not saying a word about an economy that's still number 5 in the world if it were independent, that's at the at the edge of all the most important industries today, from biotechnology to entertainment, digitality, etc. I don't need to go into any of the details right now. There's no question that they're right in signaling out California as the other, because California is the standard for a future United States, I think. And that's why I would say there's something apt about emphasizing not only the importance of California, but also emphasizing that what makes California worthwhile for others who are not in California is the whole concept of a cosmic race, or if you will, use a gentler language, the notion of real mixing together of human beings into a new kind of a culture and society.
I So I don't want to get too into it, but yes, there is a difference somewhat between the two options for American presidency coming up for 2024. Whenever Trump came in 2016 and whenever he seems to come back in popularity, there always seems to be discussion on, should we have immigration? Is diversity a good thing? And I keep thinking, these are debates you can only have in America. Mm-hmm. We don't have these debates in California. Last time we did was the 1990s, 3 decades ago. We just don't go over, well, maybe we shouldn't have immigrants and maybe we shouldn't have Mexicans. Like, that's just not we're way past that, bro. We're so way past that. Maybe you guys have that option, but this idea we're going to kick out a third of our population or 40% is ridiculous. So these are debates that are like in an era in the past for California. And I keep seeing America kind of going, no, let's have this debate again. And I view it as destructive for our society. Like, we're going over, should we have immigrants again? Really? We've had immigrants for 500 years here from Asia, Latin America, Europe,
It's what it
France,
is.
etc. California goes back before the Pilgrims ever landed on Plymouth
Absolutely.
Rock, having Latin, Indian, African, Asian, Jewish, European people living together. This is who we are. We've done it for longer than America. So it always annoys me when they have these debates on immigration and diversity. And I'm like, bro, this is not a concept we can have a debate for here in California. This is who we are. This is who we've been from day one. And there's no going back. So it's just, I see us being pulled back into the past. And at the same time, I have noticed that the Democratic Party under Joseph Biden used to say that border wall's racist, Donald Trump. That's white supremacy. Donald Trump putting Latin kids in cages, that's white supremacy. Donald Trump saying we don't want you to come to Latin people, that's white supremacy. Donald Trump using pejorative nicknames for Latin people, that's white supremacy. And yet we've seen Joseph Biden do every single one of those things. He's backed up the wall. They didn't call it fixing the wall. They called it repairing. He kept Latin kids in cages. They didn't call it cages. They called it containers because they put little green striping between the cyclone fencing. So totally different. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden both said, don't come to America on TV. And then Biden recently referred to Mexicans as, quote, illegals. Which
yes, I noticed that.
Which his own, I think it was the diversity department said not to do because it's a pejorative. When you go around and you look at Mexicans, go look at those illegals.
Yeah, no, of course.
And he literally did it on TV. So are these bad ideas from Trump staying with Trump, or are they spreading to the rest of America? And how dire does that make the situation here in California, where now the other parties, we would never have kids in cages here. We would never be calling Mexicans illegals here, period, at all. Never would happen here. Not in the last 30 years. So how safe should a Californian feel about the kind of diversity that we have and appreciate and have had for half a millennia when looking at the future of America, given this upcoming election?
You're bringing up an important distinction in principle between California and the rest of the country. California is originally, let's be blunt, it's indigenous and then it's Latino, Spanish and then Mexico. That is California. When you say we, what do you mean? As far as California is concerned, we already included or was the Latino basis, the Californio basis, and there were many ups and downs. I was just recently going over a book that I highly recommend by our first real American philosopher, Josiah Royce, who was born in Grass Valley. And in 1886, he wrote a fine book on California as well, interestingly, as a novel about some feud at some ranch. You know, he wanted to also be a writer. But the book itself, California, 1886, goes in great detail in terms of key elements. He knew these people. He met Fremont. He met secretaries of state who were all part of the takeover of California in 1846, 1848. And he came up, if you don't mind, if I can just find this quote. He came up with this statement I want to recite or read to you. He said, the Bear Flag affair, which is a real joke, from this we can date the beginning of the degradation, the ruin, and the oppression of the California people by our own, meaning, of course, Europeans from the Atlantic coast. In all subsequent time, the two peoples, as peoples, have misunderstood and hated each other with disastrous effects for both, and especially for the weaker. We came, as it seemed to them, by stealth, and we used unprovoked violence. Yet, much of this hatred might have been saved had we come peaceably and open-heartedly. So this is 1886, already a very sensitive Californian. Josiah Royce recognized the very awful starting point of the relationship between Americans and Californios. And hopefully some of that has been mitigated over the succeeding periods, although I also highly recommend Tomas Alguaer's great book, Racial Fault Lines, which showed the degree to which racial categories were exploited to eventually put people of so-called Mexican Latino background on the lowest level in terms of status and power. So there have been some very, very serious battles, and it started off very badly, as Josiah Reyes, who certainly is not a Latino, emphasized from the very start.
But he's a Californian. He's a
And he's a
Californian.
Californian. He was
And
always a lover
yeah,
of California. He ended up teaching at Harvard.
and that's the thing that gets me is so when
Yeah.
yes, California was indigenous and then it was the Latino period, but even during the Latino period, they had Scotsmen, Jewish men, Frenchmen, African Americans, and indigenous people adopt Spanish names and become very powerful in Spanish in California society.
Exactly.
Alexander
Yes.
Lebensdorf was the richest black man in the world, I think, at
I
one
didn't know
point
that.
here in
Exactly.
California.
Uh-huh. I
And
didn't know that.
one of my favorite stories is you'd have these Scotsmen come, and then they'd marry in a beautiful Latina from a California family. So it'd be like William McGillicuddy Cornhouse
Uh-huh.
Vasconcelos, right? Like it'd be all these heavy Scottish names and then a Latin name. And there was a lot of people in early California history like that because there was immigrants coming in and you could marry into the society. And if you were Jewish, you could marry an indigenous or Latina bride from a well-to-do family and be accepted in and et cetera. So it's just great. And you know, he was a Californian. There were people who recognized that it was wrong at that time. I'm glad he did the scholarship. I'm still concerned because when I talk to Californians, they have no concept of that conquest period when the Americans came in, conquered,
Mm-hmm.
set up military dictatorships, I think for 5 different generals over 5 years, the fifth one just ordering California to be a state, trained in a bunch of people, and then made all the indigenous people, all the Mexicans, all the black people, all the Asian people second class citizens. I think segregation was instituted within 1 year of the American invasion. And my favorite part is the Latino. The Americans were the illegal immigrants first, and they didn't
Mm-hmm.
care. They invaded. So I love when people say, "Oh, these illegal immigrants," and I go, "How did you come to be in charge of this place?" Through illegal immigration.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Nobody knows that history. I looked at my little niece and she went to, they teach State Ascension Day. So this is what they teach in public schools. Congress had a vote to make California a state. Yay! That's it. That's it. I've talked to college professors. I've talked to high school students. I've talked to kids. I've talked to older people. Very few people know what you and I know about the horrible history. It's just, and I'm like, why don't we teach this in public schools? Why isn't this class in our high schools? Why
I have
isn't
no idea.
it's not? And if I have relatives in Texas, you go to Texas, they know all about their history, every single minute day. And in
Mm-hmm.
California, we're like, do you know how we became a state? There was a vote, and then it happened. That leaves out so much horror, uh, white nationalism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, apartheid, military dictatorship, second class citizenship, dispossession of rights. And we love being diverse and doing the right thing. And yet we have no concept, I found, of our horrible Nazi esque history from 1846 to 1852. We literally committed a genocide and we gave receipts to people from the California government
Well,
for indigenous.
there is argument that there was a brief moment. I think one scholar refers to 1830, 1880, when, notwithstanding the negatives that you've brought up, there was the possibility of greater union, and
Sure.
it didn't come off. And that period is one that we need to spend some time understanding how that skimmed off into forms of domination that you just described very eloquently. One of the features, if I may bring this up, that also is overlooked, since you brought up the whole business about becoming a state, is that actually, generally speaking, what happens when an area becomes a state is it first becomes a territory with a governor. That never happened with California because in 1848 and 49, Congress was dealing with matters that led to the Missouri Compromise, race matters of 1850. So twice they adjourned without making California a territory. And that meant for the people who were living there, and now the majority was Americans coming across from elsewhere, was we need some sort of government. And they actually came together and created a constitutional convention in 1849. They created the first rules of a California. And then in 1850, Congress accepted California as a state. So this is quite unique. The Constitution never had any kind of clause for this situation where here are these people, they're not being ruled under the former system, which is Mexican, and they're not being ruled by the Americans. It's not a territory, and they just went ahead, at least this majority of males went ahead and created the first constitution. A very unique state of affairs. And so it's always meant that California is, again, a bit of an exception, even in terms of how it became a state in the Union.
I totally agree. And again, that's what bothers me is I found a lot of people don't know that. So when you type in California was independent, or you ask Californians, they're going to go, oh, you mean the Bear Flag Revolution when California was independent for basically a month, right? No, that's not what I meant. I meant when California was independent for a decade, or as long as Texas was independent from 1836 to 1846. And this is what kills me. I have a bunch of the Mexican sides from Texas. Every Texan knows we were independent from this year to this year for 10 years before we joined America. We could be an independent nation because we were an independent nation. No one in California knows that we were independent from Mexico and America for 10 years. It was the same amount of period as Texas, just as independent. They all know about it. They're proud of it. Almost no one knows about it, and we don't celebrate it. And I'm like, isn't that weird, the difference between a people who know their history and another people who don't? And that's why I loved your book, because you were getting at things that are true that I feel we need to know more about.
Well, there's an important difference, though, with Texas. When you're talking about this pride about being a Lone Star Republic, this was Americans flowing into Texas and taking over from the Mexicans. In the case you're describing, 3646, this is actually the autonomous movement within California itself. And so who is going to represent that? Who's going to take pride in that? The Americans who came in from outside ignore it, as you're right, and therefore it's forgotten. That's perfectly correct. Even the person who was governor of Mexico, the first California-born governor in 1836, even he is completely ignored. He's buried here in Oakland at a very important burial site. You may know about it. It's that area up in the hills. He's there. Nobody makes any visits to him or pays any attention to him. When you read about his history, they talk about him as being a drunk. Well, Winston Churchill was a drunk, but one doesn't emphasize that in terms of the historical account of it. So there's no pride in that period, as you correctly point out, when California was really autonomous, almost independent.
And I find that anathema because I think we're returning to our natural state. So in that period, again, Jews, French, indigenous, Mexican, El Salvadoran, Filipino, Chinese people, African Americans, all living together. And they were largely saying, well, we're going to do our own policies. Well, where are we now? Jews, African Americans, Latinos, El Salvadorans, Chinese, Filipinos, all coming together. And then we love telling the federal government, we're going to do what we want anyways. We told Obama we're going to do what we want on marijuana. We told Trump we're going to do what we want on COVID. And then when Biden was president, we told him we're going to ignore you and do what we want on masks anyways. So I'm like, this is who we are. This is our native state. We're returning to our original culture. And that makes sense because it was a 500-year process to get to where people thought this way. And I'm like, it's incredible to me that we don't know this history when it's very obvious the native state of who we are today. And what I see us doing now is going, isn't this great? We pulled off this diverse republic. Must have been just chance luck. Like, no, it wasn't just chance luck. It just happened, and California just happened to be diverse, and they just happened to have a high mixed. I mean, when you talk to professors today, that's what they think. Uh, what an incredible chance coincidence that California turned in to be so diverse and mixed. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It's 500 years long. It's older than America. Why can't you be aware of that and call yourself an expert on history? I don't understand.
Well, that surprises me that you say that. I think you're right, but the research on California is good. I mean, if you actually go into the amount of scholarship on California from the very beginning, there's a lot of good material. It's not like it's it's beyond reach. So there's no interest, as you say, in actually giving the credit or looking seriously at what California is all about. I like to date California from the day when it was actually named, which is May 3rd, 1535. So I may not be alive in 2035, but I'm sure you will be, and you'll be able to celebrate the half millennium presence of California. That should be at least given some credit, maybe a little party or a little procession.
Yeah.
May 3rd. That's a long time. That's a very long time.
May 3rd. Yep. I was blown away because I'm very pro California. I'm a big guy on California. I didn't even know our history. I was meeting other people, and there was some guy going, "Did you know we were independent?" And I'm like, "Oh, the Bear Flag Republic?" He's like, No. And then he named these other guys I never heard of, like Juan Alvarado. And I'm like, who? What are you talking about? And he's like, wow, you are Mr. California and you have no idea about this? And I'm like, I've never heard what you're talking about, bro. So big education for me. And what was crazy was I wrote this little essay here. I can't find stuff like this on the internet. Like I can find some maybe one quote from Ken Starr saying from 1836 to 1846, California didn't take orders from Mexico. And that's the only reference on the internet. It's really hard to find essays and articles just straight up saying we were independent.
I'm a bit surprised. I thought you'd find more, but that's interesting. Yeah. No, this is important that you wrote this work.
Professor, if you find that I'm wrong, please come back. Let's discuss it. I would love to be wrong.
No, you're not wrong. That's correct. That is correct. In 1836, Alvarez, as governor, really made California autonomous. There wasn't much control from outside. And then by the early 1840s, there was no control at all. There was the struggle between, who was it? Castro in the north and Pio Pico in the south. That was going on while these major events suddenly took place in 1846. The Bear Flag Republic is a joke. I mean, any careful study of it will say there's nothing heroic about it. I think, as I say, the Royce book, if you don't have time, that's the best account because he was a contemporary. And he looked into the primary sources, talked to the people, said the whole thing was a very bad joke. Fremont had no right to come in as he did. The official position of the U.S. government under Consul Larkin was, we want California maybe to become a sister republic. We don't want it to be taken over by the British or the French. That was it. And then with the Mexican-American War, of course, it was taken over directly, and that changed everything. Followed by, as you know, in 1848, the gold discovery. That, of course, had a traumatic impact on the whole nature of California. Those are two things that boing came out of nowhere and changed the whole course of the way. Maybe California would have been independent. Maybe it would have been part of the U.S., but in a very different kind of organization.
That's one of my favorite parts when I talk to conservatives, and they're like, California has so much debt and it's bringing America down. And I'm like, good thing you even have an America. And they go, what? And I go, do you know why you won the Civil War? Well, yeah, because we had more troops. Right. And troops fight for free. And guns are manufactured for free. And bullets are manufactured for free. And farmers just give food and cowhides to make uniforms and food for free. Where'd all that money come from? Oh, we went into debt. Let's look again. You took the gold and silver out of California after you conquered it to pay for your Union Army victory. And
good point.
That's why. So you're welcome, America. The only reason you have an America is because of us. Nobody knows this. They barely ever talk about it. I go, if we're going to talk about debt, I want all that gold back with the appropriate interest amount. And then I'll pay you back our debt and we'll see who owes who. And when you put it that way, they're like, okay, so you're talking about the debt of the Civil War times 150 years compound interest. We made it so you, America, could continue to exist. That's because of us. And if you didn't take us over and take over our resources and start, well, you wouldn't have the money. and you wouldn't have been able to form those 100,000 Union formations to defeat the South. That's a hard fact. The other part is that when I see progressives go, oh, California can't leave, it's made America progressive. And I'm like, do you realize California was forced to be a state so that slavery could exist? What? Yeah, look it up. It's called the Compromise, 1850. California came into the Union so they can make a deal with the South so that slavery could continue to exist for another 10 years. So our entry into America kept millions of Black people enslaved for another decade. And it is only because of us that the federal government as it exists today exists. But nobody knows that. Like, this is incredible. I mean, you owe us. By the way, we didn't ask to be taken over. You kind of took us over and then disenfranchised 85% of the population here, bust in your own ethnic foreigners, and then gave them first-person status. I mean, that's kind of literally what the Nazis did in Poland. Literally, sort of, you're bad ethnic groups, you move. Here's the right people. They'll take over your homes and property and run it for you. That's what the Chinese also did in what's it, Tibet. You're the wrong ethnicity.
Xinjiang as well.
Yeah, we're the right ethnicity. You're the wrong ethnicity.
The Uyghurs.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come in and we'll run it for you, and 85% of you will be disenfranchised and second-class citizens, even though this has been your land for thousands of years or hundreds. So let's get to the questions. By the way, I want to give homage.
Oh, there you go. There's Josiah Royce.
Yes. It was showing that while you were talking. It was up while you were speaking, so people could see it. Good. This is the book.
It is a.
This is a great book. Californian, and this is what I tell all my friends who are Caucasian. Being Californians in the mind, you can love diversity and be here. That's what this guy is. Caucasian, but he's clearly a Californian. He was talking about the importance of diversity at that time. That's a very California thing.
From the start, yeah, from the start.
And we were the first to have a male senator say women need the right to vote. I don't think we were the first to give women the right to vote as a state, but we were the first to have a guy go to Congress and say,
I think that took place in one of the Midwest states.
Yeah. Something like that. And it was like, wow. Okay, so we were independent 1836 to 1846. California kicked out Lieutenant Colonel Nicolas Gutierrez, and then they also later kicked out Manuel Michatorena, which historians concur was the period of independence. We're going to get to the hardcore questions now.
Okay.
Let me boost this up. And forgive me, everybody. This is me. These should be exact quotes from the book. I want to boost it up so everyone can see. Okay.
I think we've pretty well covered it as far as the whole idea of Raza Cosmica.
There you go.
Oh, I should mention one thing about the Raza Cosmica that distressed me about Vasconcelos. Although he was, again, going in the right direction, he stopped short of recognizing the Asian people. He had some very ugly things to say, which you will find in my article, about the so-called yellow people. He thought the Chinese were too populous. He had a very high opinion of classical Indian culture. He wrote about it, the Bhagavad Gita and so on, but he thought they were a degenerate people and so on. So he didn't really include the Asian side of California. He was much more oriented towards, again, the American, the Latino, and so on side. So I had some severe criticisms of him for that.
Yeah, I don't see how you could celebrate big diversity and then not accept diversity. That isn't.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that.
This happens more than once, by the way, with people.
That's sad.
They love diversity,
really
and then it turns out, we're talking right here. Yeah, it is sad. It is sad, yeah. But I just mentioned that. I mean, I admire a lot of Vasconcelos, but I have to be very harsh on that.
Yeah, please do. I was just introduced to him because I was told, Mexican people are very diverse. So like in my family, we'd have blancos, negros, y chinos. So people who are light-skinned, people who look like African Americans, and people who look Asian, in addition to people who look Latin, and that's just, it could all be in the same family. And so looking that up, I was like, oh, this is a great thing from this idea. I didn't know he did that. That's really disappointing. It's like,
It was a bad period. If you remember, the 1920s was the most severe restriction on immigration from Asian side, etc. And I think he fell into some of the prejudices of
oh, the
that time period.
yellow peril or whatever. Yeah.
Yellow peril, exactly. He used that language, unfortunately. And the irony is that he was a remarkably astute and sophisticated student of classical cultures. He knew his Indian culture, he knew Chinese culture. Didn't have any effect as far as the practicalities.
Wow. Um, yeah. It reminds me of, I had some of my relatives from Texas come to California to visit, and we took them up to the Bay Area for the day. Okay. And this was a Latin person I was related to and a Caucasian person they married. And they're in San Francisco. And at the end of the day, they're like, we're ready to get back to Texas. And the Mexican relative that I had who lives in Texas, not California, a culture to Texas, not California, was going, I know these people said, I don't like all these Mexicans speaking a different language. I can't tell what they're saying. But you know what? I agree. I don't like all these people speaking different languages and I can't tell what they're saying. And my mom and me and my aunt and everybody who's from California just looked at her like, we didn't say anything because we're like, do you understand how ignorant that is and hypocritical and negatively ironic? Yeah. Anyways, I think we covered this too. Juan Batista, we were independent.
Alvarado, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right, let's move on.
Now, as I say, one should give a little more credit to Alvarado. He's not given enough respect. He's our first California-born governor for Mexico, of course, but he was a very astute fighter for California. And as I say, the books about him somehow degenerated into, well, he was an alcoholic, but who cares?
That's what I mean about they don't want us to know our history. That guy's basically our George Washington. And that's a great, I view that as an even more California story. He's an immigrant to California and he fell in love with the place. Great. We had a governor called Schwarzenegger, same thing. I'm not endorsing his policy, but having immigrants come, adopt the culture and begin to lead us, that's a California value. We don't get weirded out by someone came from a foreign country and they've been here 30 years and they talk with an accent. Because if they speak about us and we hear that you have our same values, we're like, yeah, you're us. Go and do your. And I just find that unique. They don't really do that in many other places in the world. You need to be born there and you need to be of that group to be able to
That's true.
That's lead. True. They don't really like people who look like they came from a foreign country and are telling them what to do. Here,
Schwarzenegger is a good example because, as you know, he came hoping to be successful in entertainment and bodybuilding, and he was coming to America with a love for America, but fundamentally, he became a Californian. And as you follow his politics and so on, he was a Republican, turned out to be remarkably open to so many different ideas. And now, of course, he's a very important figure in environmentalism. And so he does show what happens if you come here, you're a true Californian in due course, and the kind of ideas that come out of that. Schwarzenegger is an excellent example. Whatever you think about his politics. Which
yeah, exactly. And the thing I point out is, show me the other Republican. Show me the other Republican who pushed climate change and made it their career. Name the other Republican who's not politically destroyed and in the last 30 years has made climate change their call. And I go, that's California. And when I hear people talk about, oh, you had these Republican presidents from California. California used to be Republican. I'm like, was it? I know on paper they put Republican, but Ronald Reagan and Nixon, yes, were conservative, but they did things like, let's start counting Latinos. Let's pay reparations to the Japanese for internment. Let's apologize for past histories. Let's have certain land protected. Let's fight for the climate. I'm like, no Republican's going to do that today. Those are California ideas. I understand they were both warmongers, but there's all these other things they did. I'm like, show me other Republicans doing that. It didn't happen. That was California. So yeah, we had California Republicans who back diversity and climate change. And yes, they're warmongers. Yes, they're pro-military. Yes, they're, give more largesse to corporations. But there's these other attitudes. I'm like, I don't see Republicans in Texas talking that way. You know, let's give reparations to the minorities who were hurt. I mean, Reagan did that. I, you know. Anyways, what was California like for minorities before and after America took over? We talked a little bit about this, but you had a
Mhm.
great quote in here. How would you describe it, Professor?
Well, the first period, I think, is a very difficult, demanding period. I mentioned the work by Almaguer, I think you have it here, who goes into great detail about the whole idea of labeling race and using that as, you might say, a weapon, governmental and otherwise, to impose certain forms of strong control, either direct or indirect, either straightforwardly racist or indirectly in terms of the way, let's say, the public schools were run or public facilities, swimming pools, access to swimming pools, things like that. So that was, I would say, pretty well the late 19th and early 20th century. And I would argue, again, this is a question of very specific empirical work that I'm not a master of, but I would argue that World War II was decisive, not only because it opened up a lot of doors for minorities in terms of, again, employment possibilities related to the military effort in places here, Richmond, Oakland, in Marin County, and so on, but also because, again, it loosened up a lot of these constrictions, the elimination of miscegenation
Yes.
laws, where California took a lead actually in the late
Yep.
40s, and slowly chipping away the kind of indirect. The directs are easier to hit if you're going to hit them, but the indirect forms of prejudice are much harder to, as it were, work in. And then I would add the 1965 change in immigration laws. If you recall, those changes were substantial because they eliminated the old quota system. And by eliminating the old quota system, they also opened the doors for a much easier access of Latin populations coming into California and into the United States. So I would say between World War II and 65, there were some important positive changes. And by this point, we are getting a whole series of what I would call progressive governors, including a Republican governor somewhere in the midst of all that, from Warren, again, to the names that we know going into the 60s.
That's right.
So there was a real turn, I would say. Also, working against limited housing access, some very important decisions that were made by the state Supreme Court along those lines. And I would think that now we're getting to a point where there's certainly much more possibilities. But I would certainly think that the late 19th century going into the early 20th century was, again, the result of no real arrangements between the local populations, the California population, the indigenous population, and the Americans who had taken it
Yeah,
over.
I totally agree with you. I think the 1945 to 1965 was the most pivotal period for minorities in the modern era as we know it. Obviously, a lot of more improvement had to change. Obviously, things were still pretty racist by 65. But when you're talking about how bad it was and
Yeah,
moving to now, I think the biggest jump was then. And then we kept making incremental changes from there. And we still need to. Of course, racism still exists. It's nowhere near what it was in 65. There's work to do. I'm not saying there isn't. Just saying big jump, 45 to 65. What you had after World War II, they had to integrate the military. They had to allow black people into the military at an equal step. That
exactly.
was huge. That was
It was
big to
indeed.
have the president come on TV and go, "We're integrating the military, and there's going to be an institution where black men and white men are at least officially on paper treated as equal." I understand that's not exactly how it
Yeah.
worked out, but to have the president come out and say that was big. And then have another president use troops to enforce integration as Eisenhower did. He was not super racially sensitive, but that was still some recognition of there's got to be a base floor for how bad we can treat our people, and
Mhm.
we can't do this, right? And then you had the Voting Rights Act. Yeah, I agree. A lot of big changes there.
Mhm. Well, I remember my neighbor, wonderful neighbor, Gene Tarrant, who really set up our neighborhood committee here in on my street, Edward Street, was actually someone Pearl Harbor in the military, an African American gentleman, and he was on the same ship throughout the whole war, survived. But the best he could do was to become a chef. And I always remember how resentful he was of that. In 48, as you say, that formally changed. By the mid 50s, there was some flow of possibilities. And now, of course, from the 80s, 90s on, we have generals that are African Americans and so on, heads of the chiefs of staff and so on. But I always remember his understandable resentment that that's as far as he could go. But that was the beginning of the change. Once you've got, unfortunately, bodies being sacrificed for the country, once you have women getting into working on all levels in terms of military matters, as happened in World War II, then you have suffrage, you have possibilities opening up. Well, I hate to have war doing that, but war does that sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of the civil rights movement, as I understand, was because you had African Americans who had seen war and faced death, and they came back and they're like, I got to put up with this.
Exactly.
I almost got shot.
Come on. Exactly.
You know, so
that had occurred after World War I too. But in the case of World War I, there was a very strong right-wing reaction in the 20s and going into the 30s, which restricted the possibilities of World War I. It did provide, of course, the amendment for women's suffrage in the US, that at least took place. But otherwise, there was a real constriction, anti-communism, anti-outsiders coming from Eastern Europe, etc., and also especially the Asians. So that kind of constricted it at that moment. It could have been much more wide-ranging. But World War II was different.
Yeah. Was it the big backlash against Italians, I believe, at that time after World War I, for bringing anarchy, I believe, was the political ideology at the time, and we were concerned about them bringing that here. Much the way people talk about in fear-mongering ways, Muslims trying to set up some Islamic thing here. I read some articles where they were talking about Italians bringing anarchy and anarchist thought to America, and they're going to make us all anarchists. You know, it's the same idea. Okay.
Yeah, that anarchy paranoia went with anti-communist paranoia. Sometimes the two are merged together. Communists are anarchists, anarchists are communists, and so on and so forth. That kind of red fear, or fear of something called the red.
I was just surprised.
Today, even now, Trump is speaking about communism. He's sort of overlooked that the world communism came to an end in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. They still use the same sloganeering.
Trump did that, but so did Joe Scarborough on MSNBC about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, is that right? I didn't see that.
He said, we got to watch out for Russia because of communism. Russia, communism, Russia, communism, Russia. I'm like, they're not communist anymore, bro. They're a market-based society. I'm not saying they're good. Well, the Russian people are great. I'm not saying their government is all on the up and up, but they're not communist. No one practices communism there. I think they have a little party, like 2%. You know, some guys, let's go back to communism.
They did nothing. They did nothing. Well, Putin is a complete non-communist. He's a Russian Empire person. Autocrat. You know, that's his system. He has not the least interest in communism. He does have an interest in the power of the old Soviet Union.
Yes, of course.
That's another story. That belongs to the larger history of the Russian Empire.
Right.
And its forms of imperialism, which
but he's not
preceded the Soviet Union.
Yeah, they're still trying to present him as he's going to have this opposite ideology and force it all over Europe. And I'm like, that's just those. They don't do that anymore. It's about money and resources. And buffer states. And let's not forget that when he invaded Ukraine, he took over the industrial mineral-rich region first.
Yeah.
Coincidence? He took over the mineral-rich region first. I was like, coincidence there?
Yeah.
It's about cash. I think we covered this a little bit. This is the last. How diverse is California compared to America, compared to the world? The point of your book was to suggest that California might be the best candidate for the cosmic situation, Rasa Cosmica.
As far as population, and then also with the Industrial Revolution thing, I argued. Now, I was using psychologist
Sarah Khan.
material, Sarah Khan's studies, which were a bit detailed, maybe too detailed for our discussion, but they had to do with how people identify themselves as one or more race and so on in terms of the usual census business. So using one category, which again can be questioned, I'm not disputing that. She came up with the conclusion that we meaning California, were by far the most multiracial population in America, with Texas and New York behind. So I was satisfied with that. I don't know the evidence or the statistics for other, shall we say, Mesoamerican countries. Maybe they're more mixed. I'm not taking a position on that. Now, my article made the move that if California is the most multicultural state in the US, which I believe can be confirmed statistically, insofar as statistics work, then the combination with the whole business about the aesthetic era that Vasconcelos equally required for a cosmic race applies distinctly to California. There's no Mesoamerican country that can match us on that level. So it's this combination of the two. We're the most multicultural in the US, at least, and we're the most advanced in terms of this move towards this new kind of economy, which we could call an aesthetic age following Vasconcelos, with some differences, but still it works. So again, it's worth remembering that I'm making the argument on these two matters, not just one. I can't really confirm we're more multicultural than I don't know, Guatemala or Honduras and so on, or even Brazil, for example.
Right. So I would definitely agree. It's easy to say that we're the most aesthetic, technologically communicative, I think was the way you were defining it. We invented the internet, we invented the smartphone, we invented the laptop. We have the most internet-based companies here. Silicon Valley's here. And despite what everybody said, including New Yorkers on their Miracle Mile, people in China, people in Japan, people in Israel, no one has created a Silicon Valley that's as vibrant and creative and as innovative as the one that we have here. And people have been trying for 3 decades. They can't pull it off. So I think that's a given. We have that. Then we can move to, is California the most multiracial, cultural? I think it is, because when you look at interracial children, the product of thing, we're crawling with it. Sacramento's had the highest rate for many years. Houston's a good candidate. But the thing is, I've been to New York City, and I've been to Texas, and I've been to Houston. The Mexican side's from Texas. They have this saying, the moment you're outside of Houston or the moment you're outside of Austin, you're in Texas. It's similar to a phrase you may hear, the moment you're outside of Atlanta, you're in Georgia. You also may hear.
I know what that's like, by the way. I know that area.
Yeah, so you get the idea. There's also the moment you're outside of New York City, you're in New York State. So I'm in Fresno, the interior backwater, right? Along with Sacramento. And we've had Armenians, Greeks, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, El Salvadorans, Oaxacans, Mexicans, indigenous from 3 different types, African Americans, all integrated for 100 years. And we're the backwater part. When I went to New York, I went to New York City. It wasn't even New York City. It was the tip of Manhattan Island was the diverse part. You start walking north on New York City, and it gets white. And they'll go, oh, well, we're very Jewish. Okay, yeah, that's a form of diversity, but everybody here's kind of from a European heritage. I don't see any Asian people or Black people or Latin people or Arab people. And then same thing in Texas. You get outside of Houston, it goes white Mexican real fast. I don't think we get that in California.
Well, as far as New York is concerned, I would still give some effect with regard to an area like Queens. If you go into Queens, which is one of the boroughs of New York, it's very, very mixed, very, very mixed.
Sure, but
Manhattan is a different story. Manhattan is the gold of property and real estate.
Okay, but if you
state, etc., so it's going to have, as you say, certain slants where the wealthier, which will be more white, will probably dominate much of the land, occupation, and property.
But if we took the landmass of New York City and the urban areas that were very,
remember when you say New York City, you mean the 5 boroughs.
Yes, I'm sorry, the 5 boroughs. I apologize.
No,
yes, it's important to get that. The 5 boroughs. in landmass compared to the size of the rest of New York State. It's like this compared to this. Whereas,
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, there have been moves to make New York a state, political state.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm just saying the same thing about Houston
That's a different
and
story.
Austin. You can go to these places, but the moment you step outside, it goes really rural and not diverse
Mhm.
super fast. The moment you leave LA, there's still diverse communities. The moment you leave the Bay
Right,
Area, there's Sacramento. You leave LA, you come to
right.
Fresno. So the backwater part's still
Absolutely.
diverse. The whole state of California is diverse. I see metro regions
Mhm.
achieving levels of diversity that we have ubiquitously across our entire state. For me, that makes us the most diverse because we have
Mhm.
it the
Mhm.
most spread out and for the
Right.
longest. Houston only recently became diverse. Last 10, 15 years, we've been doing this over a
Yeah,
century.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think there's any dispute. The U.S., I mean, California is definitely the most diverse in the U.S. All I was saying about other countries is maybe there's a more diverse place, like
Sure,
Brazil.
sure.
I don't know, but we're talking the United States.
I think yeah, and I think I don't know if I mentioned it earlier in this recording, but when we were talking earlier, I looked it up. Scientists consider Papua New Guinea the most diverse place on Earth.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Because it
Thank
has
you,
the most different
scientists.
genetic strands
Yeah.
of ethnic groups and the most different languages spoken.
Mm.
So even though they're all on one island and their languages are very similar and their genetic pools are very similar because they're technically diverse, therefore that's the most diverse place. The other most diverse place is some part in like Namibia. It's the same thing. We have
Yeah.
300 ethnic groups with 300 languages, all from with no Asians, Latinos, or Arabs. And I'm like, okay, so it's a diversity of different people from around the world coming together. A world city diversity,
Sure.
like Paris, New York, London, etc. I think when you look at it that way, um, we're at least tops or at the top. Maybe Singapore. Singapore does a pretty good job.
Well, Singapore is very Chinese oriented. That's why it was dropped by Malaysia when it
Okay.
became independent. It was actually forced out because it was too Chinese from the point of view of the Malaysians who are not
Okay.
Chinese.
Right.
But in any case, your question was how diverse is California compared to the rest of America? You seem to be wanting to go to the world standards,
Well,
which is very
it's a
admirable
hard
on your
question to
part.
answer. Yeah.
But yeah, it is a hard question to answer. I think the point remains that as far as we're concerned, where we live, this is definitely diversity. And as you point out, it's not today's diversity, it's been around for a long time, with some restrictions, attempts not to have diversity, and counterforces at play. Josiah Royce brought up a very interesting point that when even the Americans, that is from the European side, when they came into California, they wanted to get away from the struggles that they had left, North, South, free slave, and so on. So there was at least a tendency to be a little more understanding of everybody else. We're here, we're starting anew, we want to have something different, we don't want to go back to the old feuds and so on. But again, the politics and so on changed all that, unfortunately. But by, I would say, certainly by 1880. But at least the people
Yeah.
who came together here had a good starting point, and they already had the standard of, again, the Mexican Spanish population, which had always been much more open towards other groups coming in.
Yeah. Yeah. And then unfortunately, you get Americans coming in, I think like Barrett, who gets here. And the moment he gets here, he's like, segregation, everything. I'm
Mm-hmm.
governor.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah. Well, there you are.
institute, segregate everything. Okay, let's go to the last question. Again, precisely in terms of such technology, we've sort of already covered this cultural configurations we must accord.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so that's the. Um,
pretty well. Um, Again, I would say today, in terms of the politics, which I think was interesting that you brought up 2024, the elections and so on, it's worth, again, emphasizing if there are critics of California, as there are certainly from the, if you will, Republican right wing side, they need to make good on their claims. For example, a colleague of mine, Olivia Wise, just provided me with some details on the rate of crime in so-called Republican states. Those rates are high. Well, why aren't they dealing with them if they're using certain techniques which they think is very effective, and then we here in California with our sloppy, generous attitudes are failing? Let's do a great comparison. What is the situation of crime in San Francisco? Apparently, it's it's down. Some things are up, but certainly murder is down. Well, let's compare and let's come up with certain conclusions. What really works pragmatically? Don't give me rhetoric, but pragmatically, how are these states doing? As these Republican states doing as far as their treatment of questions like crime? I think that's one of the big issues, and that's why I think California is especially important, as we were saying earlier, in this year particularly, because California has been singled out by the other side as what goes wrong entirely, in the running of a state. Okay, well, let's do some comparisons.
I think
And
it's
I'm glad to learn. I don't know, maybe there are a lot of flaws that we need to learn. Let's move in on those flaws. That's why we elect officials to take care of them or deal with them. I have no objection to good, well-meaning criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do that. It's yes, you won't hear Republicans bring up that we're the fifth largest economy, and we were the sixth before that, and we're basically the economy of a European nation. They won't bring that up because that goes against their thing that all Californians are bad for business, right? We have to be bad for business, so we can't have a strong economy because that's counter narrative. So you can't say we're bad for business and we have a strong economy. They're like, how would you explain that? No, it's good. Your bad economy, bad for business. One of my favorite things was they saw the Republicans the last year of Trump's presidency had their entire Republican National Convention based upon California bashing. So if you type in the California Republican National Convention the last year he was president, they had Gavin Newsom's ex-wife. I forget her name. She's on Fox. Her and a couple other people. It was just California's the opposite. Oh yeah, Gavin Newsom's.
I forgot that. Thank you. I'll look it up.
His first
it was already back then, 2020.
Yeah, hardcore on Fox, and she slammed the hell out of California, and the whole convention was about how California is not America, and it's bad. Therefore, we have to make sure America's not like California. They focused the entire convention of one of the two national parties on a state is the epitome of what not to be. I'm not joking. LA Times covered it because that's never happened before. You never had a party go, it's 1830s, and the Democrats decided that Illinois is the worst example of America, and they want all other 49 states to know, don't be Illinois. That's never happened. I mean, maybe there are people talking about egotistical New Yorkers, but it was more of a type of person. This is a party singling out a state and going, you're the evil one. You're the other. You're the opposite of us. You're the what not to be, etc. And I'm like, I've never seen that kind of laser focus on a state by a party. I don't think ever in U.S. history. And that was last year. The bash. I mean, they love to focus on us, and they can't admit.
What do you mean 2020? Didn't you say 2020?
2020. Sorry, 2020. Yes, I'm sorry. And then they also during that time
this is a very important point. I'm going to look it up. I think it's a fascinating point. I forgot all about that. You're right. It's been 4 years that California has been singled out. I was just talking about the last year and this year in terms of hitting California from many angles. No, that's very, very interesting.
I'm going to try to, it was, yeah, here we go. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, please take your time.
1 second. Come on. Oh, there it is. All right, I'm going to pull it up right now.
Okay.
There it is. Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Let me write this down. Well, I'll be able to watch this later, but still.
RNC speakers paint California as dangerous dystopia by the Los Angeles Times. RNC speakers paint California as dangerous dystopia. Michael Finnegan, August 22nd, 2020, not 2024. I was wrong. Thank you for correcting me.
No, that's fine. I just wanted.
No, we need.
No, it's even more important. It means 4 years, not just 2 years.
Yeah. And
by the way, that's kind of redundant. Dangerous dystopia. What is? Well, can there be a dystopia that's not dangerous?
Yeah, helpful dystopia. A very safe and healthy dystopia. No, yeah, you're right. That's kind of sloppy English. Come on, LA Times. But there it is. And what they're basically saying is,
I'll read it.
Damn, sure. This was LA Times going, damn, they focused in a convention on us, not like a person
Right.
or
Okay.
Berkeley. They've always bashed Berkeley liberals or San
Oh
Francisco.
yeah,
This was like everything in California, bad,
yeah.
wrong, the other, don't be. Okay, Republicans across America, we all agree California bad. I'm like, and here's LA Times going, wow, we've never seen that before. So you're right, they do seem to focus on us, and they do seem to,
Well,
it's
I'm
yeah.
I'm looking forward to going through it actually with some detail because I'd like to know the specific charges, which is always informative in its own way. List, please, why California is so dangerous. I'll want to study that at some length. I might mention, if you don't mind, my plugging something with the magazine that I'm joined that David Reed started a couple of years ago. It's called Dispatches, and you thankfully mentioned it at the beginning of our discussion. Our next issue is going to be on California civilization. We're having meetings in the North and the South, and this kind of material I'm going to make use of. Probably the issue will come out after the election, but I'll want to make some use of what you've just brought up in terms of the signaling out of California as everything that's terrible from the Republican side. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's another article. This is from a poll they did recently. Half
What's the date? Roughly. Oh, it's already 2024. Okay. LA
half
Times.
of
Okay.
Republicans say California isn't really American.
We
That was
love it. Thank
yeah.
you.
So they did they did a survey a few weeks ago and on support and et cetera, and it came out that like half of Republicans said they don't view California as American, and they'd be
Wow.
hopeful they'd be okay
50%
if it
believe
passed.
that the state is in decline.
Yeah,
Oh, that's ridiculous, but
yeah.
interesting.
Well, they're looking at what
There,
they well, so what because I have relatives who watch Fox and Newsmax. All they hear is homeless people on the streets, feces on the streets, and people run into stores and steal things. Now, those
yeah,
are
no, those
problems.
are serious problems. Yeah.
They are. But the way they paint the picture, that's everywhere on every street block, everywhere throughout all of California. Like where you live, where I live, you couldn't go anywhere, and that's just not true. I've been to LA, I've been to San Francisco, I've seen the bad spots. They are
Yeah.
there. They're not the entire city, and they're not all of California, and that's not the only thing we have going on for us. If you watch their TV, that's all we're doing is we're just letting people rob and use the bathroom on the streets, and that's all because that's all they ever talk about.
Mhm.
You'll never hear them go, brand new university built up,
Mhm.
groundbreaking scientific discovery made, new technology, and feces, homeless, needles, crime. Oh, and undocumented immigrants victimizing and shooting American citizens on the streets in rampant manners. That's the picture they have of us. Um, so yeah, that's I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
those are the articles. But anyways, so that just backs up what you're saying. There's a lot of we're the other.
Mhm.
We're the
Well,
other.
again, that's worth cultivating. Let's not pull back. Let's say, yes, we are the other to many problems that exist in the rest of the United States. Pay more attention to how we are dealing with it, including the problems that we haven't solved. For sure, the ones that you brought up just now, they have to be dealt with. They are points of great concern. They are related to a matter that exists both in the States and in California, which is the widening disparity of wealth between a smaller and smaller minority and the greater majority. These are issues that the US faces and that California faces. There's no reason to blink and avoid it. You have to deal with it. And there are many ways that we're concerned with dealing with it. But if you're not dealing with a constructive criticism, if you're not thinking, oh, I want to help California by offering critique that will help them, then why should we pay any attention other than say, good, we are your other, and our otherness is actually putting you way in the background as far as the present state of economy, the present state of, I would say, human relationships across the board. We are really the testing ground of some incredible events that hopefully will lead to a benign future.
That's there was a TV show Um, let me show you this real quick, if I may.
Yeah, please. You always have fascinating material.
I'm sorry.
No, really, I'm writing it all down. I'll watch it when I have a chance to watch the video to make sure I've got everything down right. But I'm writing it down even as we go.
So they had a TV show on Netflix called The
Okay, what is
Politician.
this?
Let's see here. Gwyneth
What is this?
Paltrow. They had a TV
Oh,
show
Gwyneth.
called The Politician with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
on a website, and go to my website and use the hashtag "Let's get the Cal out of here." Shouts Gwyneth Paltrow Netflix series "The Politician," running for governor on a promise to lead California's secession from the United States. By Joe Matthews.
Let's not start up with that one. Okay.
No, but hold on. I'm not. In her speech in the video, what she says is exactly what you're saying. These Republicans say that we're horrible with money, we can't tax, we can't run businesses, and yet they can never bring up the fact that we're the world's 5th largest economy.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen someone articulate that as well as what you're talking about outside of this fictional character in this movie. That's the only reason that I brought it up.
I'll have to watch it. But is the direction of this, whatever it is, series pushing secession?
There's one episode where she does that. It's basically about her son wants to work in Hollywood as a singer.
Okay.
And it's a family drama. It has a lot of singing and drama. There's one episode where they have her do this, and then they never touch it again. Okay. And the only reason I brought it up was that in her speech, when she's saying why, she brings up this criticism. We are always told we don't know economics, we don't know money, we can't figure these things out, and yet we have an economy that dwarfs all the other states because of who we are and the things that we've done, and yet Republicans will never mention those two things in the same sentence. That's why I brought that up. She does that.
Okay, I'll take a look. Yeah, I was only a little concerned. The issue of secession, which we haven't touched on, I find pretty worthless. I mean, now you have the secession talk coming out of Texas. Mainly secession talk in California has to do with breaking up the state, which comes up every now and then. It came up originally when the state was considered in the 1848 period. Should it be a single state going all the way to the Rocky Mountains, which was what Alta California was, and eventually was settled into being the smaller, very cohesive state. The one reason at that time that there was a push for the larger was by the Southerners, who then wanted to create a situation where it would break up into North and South, and the South would become a slave state.
Right.
And that didn't work.
Right.
So I'm very suspicious of secessionist language coming out of California. Although, as I say, most of the time it's about internal California, not separating California from the United States. My own position is that we are the vanguard of the United States. They benefit, we benefit. There's no reason to shake that up.
I'm just pointing out that whenever Trump comes around, Californians get scared. And when he was elected in 2016, Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University both did polls showing 32% for immediate secession. That's very reputable. Both those polls also showed that it went up to about 47.5% of the population were not immediately opposed to the discussion. Recently, YouGov, and that's where this LA Times poll comes from, was talking about that. And there's another YouGov poll that shows it's still at that same level of support. So that's all I'm saying. Those are hard facts.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. People get scared when Trump's here because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to retain the rights and privileges of the America that they thought they knew. Whether that's a correct reaction or not, that's what I saw. You know, the guy's talking about Mexicans are rapists and let's not have Arabs come into the country. And I don't know about immigration and hey, white supremacists, stand down and stand by. That sort of talk.
Oh, yeah, I remember all that. Yeah.
The feces out of people here. And one thing's for sure, this place will not put up with it. So if it comes down to you got to do this, you got to do that, why don't you give up your love of diversity and immigrants and culture? We're not going to do that. So push comes to shove. Then that's all that it is. I view it as a fear reaction. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
When we look at an America that's might reelect him, it's hard to tell people you have no reason to be scared of anything, right? Because we were told he's horrible, he's awful. Okay, well, he won the presidency. Oh, no, no, that was Russia that made that happen. Actually, no, it wasn't. Turns out that's totally a lie. It was the American people. Okay, but we'll let everybody know he's horrible and then they won't back him. Well, actually, that's a lie. That didn't work out. They still stick with him. Oh, well, January 6th will get them to turn away from him. Well, actually, no, that didn't. Republicans walked it back. He'll never come back.
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, he is running. Actually, he is the nominee. Actually, he could run again. I mean, it's just this nightmare never seems to end for Californians where they look at this guy. Our own legislature said the day that he woke up, they felt like they woke up in a foreign land. That's a hard quote from our legislature describing America the day Donald Trump was elected, because they couldn't come to terms with the idea that Americans would elect this person. Well, it looks like half of America likes this guy, and they might be choosing him.
Well, the fact of the matter is they didn't. As you know, he lost by 3 million votes. It was the whole system by which presidents are chosen. Yeah. He lost by 3 million votes, which people did not elect him.
True. He won the presidency, though, by the Electoral College.
Exactly, yeah.
Which we were told did not happen. We were told the Russian government literally switched voting machines, and that turned out to not be true. However, Business Insider pointed out when he won, Hillary won the popular vote by the amount of California votes. So she only won the popular vote by just the percentage of votes that we provide, which means, and this was recognized by the media, outside of California, over half of Americans support him. So you're talking to the average Californian. Hey, we have a majority. No, Hillary won because of just us, which means outside of us, half of your fellow Americans like everything he said. Mexicans are rapists. We don't need immigrants. Why trust these Muslims? I don't know about black people. They were down. And then when I asked Californians, does that make you comfortable as somebody who loves diversity, loves our values, to know that half of the country you're depending on to keep those don't share them with you and are okay with a guy who calls all Mexicans rapists? And when I ask Californians that, they're very uncomfortable with that reality. I'll leave it there.
No, I appreciate your qualification. That was an excellent qualification and worth my thinking at more length, and also the importance of California for keeping this.
We're key.
Okay, somewhat controlled. I guess I'm not a person who believes in Armageddon, and I'm also not a person to believe in the language of being scared. These are challenges, serious challenges. The U.S., California has dealt with them before. We'll deal with them. If he wins the election, we're still a member of the United States with all kinds of rights that comes from a federal system. California has a lot of moves to make, and so we will, obviously, if necessary, we will.
I would point out that having kids in containers, expanding the wall, telling Mexicans don't come here, referring to them as illegals, is not in our values, and that's the way the country's gone under Joe Biden. So we said we're going to move away from Trump, and then we ended up with a guy who did things that would never, ever, ever, ever happen here for any politician, or they would be immediately removed. His wife referred to Mexicans as breakfast tacos.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Really?
Yeah, I'm actually going to keep up on this. And then she came here and she goes, "Si se puedo." She came to California and screwed up the phrase "si se puede." So apparently they have no Mexicans advise them, because the president's wife could not get "si se puede" correct when that's all she had to say, and she flew to California. This is the same woman who referred to us as breakfast tacos. No, I'm not. So I'm just going, how does that, as a Latino, I'm supposed to go, kids in cages, Trump, bad. Oh, I like your kids in cages. That's cool. And the way you said illegals, boy, that gives me a warm feeling in my heart. Totally different from when Trump did it. I lived through the 1990s. I know that kind of.
This is disheartening. Why isn't there? I have to check on this. Is there no major Latino advisor within the White House at all? Nobody.
There are, however. Then let's talk about that. So
I don't know enough.
Javier Becerra was the attorney general, I think, in California, and then he was hired to go work for Joe Biden. Joe Biden referred to him as Javier Becerra. So he couldn't even get his name right when he was announcing how he was hiring Latinos. Becerra has almost no chance to meet with the president. You can also look at Mayorkas, who barely meets with the president. He's also from California. He's been Um, Generally abysmal. The other thing is that even if they're Latinos in the government, what good are they? They had kids in cages, expand the border wall,
Yeah.
call them illegals, say not to return, and you're going to call yourself a self-respecting Mexican who works for the president and you think that's cool? I don't know any
Yes.
self-respecting
Yes.
Mexican in California who would go, my boss calls Mexicans illegals.
Very dismaying.
That's cool. You'd be fired in California. You would be ostracized for working for someone like that. Mayorkas and Becerra still do. And we got Harris. Harris is from California. They
Right.
asked her if she visited the border and she laughed. They asked her about children in cages and she goes, you would be removed and
Yeah.
chased into the streets with pitchforks if you did that in California. Something happens when you go to DC where, again, it's kids in cages, illegals, don't come here. The American dream's not for you. You bring diseases. Um, how does that make a Latin person feel that the Democrats are the total opposite of the Republicans, and we should feel good about the trajectory of America? They would never have done this 5 years ago. What I'm seeing is the Democratic Party walking backwards. They're
I
backing up.
agree with you. I agree with you. They're definitely, that's what happens in politics. They're being pulled by their opponents
Yeah, I remember this thing called the Crystal
in a
Knot
certain
in
direction. I agree
1934
completely.
Germany.
You know, the vice president, the vice president was actually brought up 2, 3 blocks from where I live on Edward Street. And so I know the environment, the daily environment in which she grew up, the local park, the schools, and so on. So, as you say, this happens. You go to Washington and you suck into that atmospherics as she did. Although there's some questionable aspects about her anyway, even while she was a political figure in California.
I just see these behaviors from these Californians that would never be tolerated here for 5 seconds, and then they go and they do it, and there's not a word, and there's no criticism of it. My other favorite one was when Nancy Pelosi pushed a little Latina out of the way. You remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
There was the Mayra Flores was one out of
Really?
Texas,
Yeah.
and the Democrats didn't like the idea that Latino Republicans could win. So there was a picture, and her daughter was texting next to her, and Nancy just pushed her out of the way. I lived through the 1990s. I know what that is when elderly Caucasian people push young Latin children out of the picture. It's called subdued white nationalism and racism. She was not criticized at all. She's from California. Where did she
Yeah,
get that
that's
behavior? And then there was protesters, and she said, "Go back to China." My
I
God.
don't remember saying that she did, really.
She said to protesters, "Go back to China," because they were protesting about Palestine. And so she assumed they couldn't be real Californians or Americans, and they were paid for by the Chinese government. So they need to go back to China. Can you imagine if Donald Trump told protesters, go back to X country? So Nancy Pelosi, elderly Caucasian woman,
Yeah,
pushes young
yeah.
Latina out of the picture and tells Asian people, go back to China. That's some of the most racist, expletive stuff I've seen. Not
Hmm.
called out at all by AOC or Biden or anyone in the Democratic Party while they talk
Hmm.
about how they love Latin people. How does that make us feel like progress is going in the right direction instead of the wrong direction? I'm as a
No,
Latin
you're
person, these
perfectly
are
right.
questions I have to
So,
ask myself every day is America's going in the right direction? Really? Based on what? AOC cannot criticize her own party for saying that. And then they try to act
mhm.
like uh, the Republicans are not fair partners on the border bill. I mean, you criticized them and told them that all their talk was racist and bad, and then you proposed the same language yourself.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
if you criticize the Nazis and then 4 years later you go, I have a plan and it sounds just like theirs, how are you different from them? And given that you started to adopt this ideology, why should I be believing that the country's going in the right direction rather than that the sickness is only spreading from Trump to others who used to hate him and now they're adopting his same
Hmm.
tactics? Why does that give me positive thoughts about the future of America as a Latin person? What would you say to a Latin person to go, you need to feel positive about this given all these developments?
I personally don't have a strong feeling about being positive or negative. It seems to me that if you're in the midst of a continued struggle, you look for those openings that you need to pull push, and of course you fight against the counterforces that you've so well stated. In terms of the general influence of a Trump period, I think when we were talking about this before we started this discussion, you brought up quite correctly that the story of Trump goes way back. Goes
Oh,
way
yes, sir.
back to the Reagan and other days, and so that has to be remembered. It's not a sudden event that came out of nowhere. So now it's come, like some sort of terrible disease. It's come to that point of crisis, and we have to face that. For anyone who's Latino, what I would say is what's going on in terms of your local and your state votes, in terms of who gets into office positions and elsewhere, because one has to consolidate that. If you're moving into, as we all know, plurality, maybe even majority in terms of California population, that has to increasingly be reflected in the manner in which we are represented in Washington and also, of course, within the state. And those are the tasks that one has to really throw oneself into without necessarily feeling positive or negative. It's an ongoing struggle. There's no question about that. The indicators that you've just given me, and some of them I didn't know about, especially the Pelosi, yeah, they're very disturbing, very disturbing.
We just had this.
But it doesn't help to be, it doesn't help to be pessimistic or optimistic.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm just asking.
That goes on.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. I just remember when Trump was elected, the shock was that we thought America was going this way, right? We're just going in one direction. And then Trump made it look like maybe we're going backwards. And that's what seemed to scare a lot of people. And I'm going, well, if that was the fear against him, how is that not a reasonable fear against the Biden administration? Because it's also examples of things going backwards. Where's the example of things going forwards? And I don't think we've seen that yet. And I hope we see that in the future.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. But for the moment, there's no question that, as far as I'm concerned, the election of 2024 has to go one way.
Sure.
And then we see where we are when the dust settles. I mean, if the dust settles with another Trump administration, the counter moves that have to be taken will be, I think, much stronger. Have to.
There's a lot of concern that he will be able to be.
If Biden survives, then we have to start zeroing in on Biden himself. We're starting to change that. And also, everything you've said tells me there's got to be much more of a Latino presence in Washington with the White House. No question. There's a real disturbance there.
I would say, listen. You can hire a bunch of Latinos, but if you tell them to shut up and don't contradict me.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay,
you're not there if you're not being listened to.
I hire these people, who I ignore and do whatever I want.
Yeah, exactly. But some of that has to be them. Some of them that
sure
has to be their statecraft, their capacity to employ strong political measures. It's all a very difficult game. We know this since Machiavelli, and they have to also be the ones to make sure they're not ignored, but they break into whatever that enclosed realm is, which we know comes up again and again within the White House, whatever the administration.
Just to get at your point, they did an interview on MSNBC with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. They were not consulted at all by Joe Biden on his border bill to deal with immigration. So not one member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus was consulted by Joe Biden on his immigration. Yeah. So we're talking about involving Latinos. Yeah, he's got them around him. Have you heard of tokenism?
I think I know what tokenism is.
So tokenism is a term from the 1990s that meant we're diverse. See, I hired a Mexican who never contradicts me. I hired an Asian who never contradicts me. So I can say racist Asian stuff and then say I'm diverse because the Asian person never contradicts me because they're scared of losing their job. And then I can say racist Mexican stuff because, see, the Mexican never complains when I say it because he's secretly hired of being fired by me. Tokenism. I'm diverse. No, you're not. You have these pictures here, and that's not what you're really doing. It's just interesting because you're talking about an early period of California, which I think we both described as Alameda-esque. A beautiful picture of diversity. Not perfect, but a beautiful coming together of many different peoples from different cultures, and that's wonderful. And I'm wondering if other people in the country share our goal. When you're talking about, I don't know if we need to have immigration anymore by both the Democrats and the Republicans, it gets a little scary for people who are wondering about, will there be a future and a place for California values? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Last thing,
I am on that level. I am more optimistic than you are, I guess.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I hope so. I hope so. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Is there anything about this book that we haven't talked about that you wanted to cover? Were there special points? I read the book. I read the article. Sorry, I read the article. Sorry, in the book California History. Sorry about that. And I loved it. I pulled out the quotes that I thought were most important. But were there sections of the book that I really made an important observation here? I wanted to cover. There was some controversial statement I made in this thing, and I wanted to
No,
clarify that.
everything was fine. I very much appreciated the care you took. I had a section which didn't come up, and maybe
Yeah.
that was unnecessary. But I wanted to bring to the Californians this notion that, as far as Mesoamerican mythology is concerned, I consider the myth of Quetzalcoatl to be very important. And I believe that it came to California from Oaxaca. After all, the ships that landed in La Paz in 1535 came from Oaxaca. And so part of my article, it wasn't an important section, but it was important for me, was to say, let's give much more attention to the major mythologies of Mesoamerica because we're part of that as Californians. And for me personally, anyway, one of the most attractive aspects of the mythology is Quetzalcoatl. He's associated with peace, with culture, with creative activities, with coming together, with the Mestatie idea. So that was just a little move on my part to again show respect not only for Quetzalcoatl, but for also for those of us Californians who go to Mexico or Mesoamerica, go visit these places, Teotihuacan, especially Monte Alban, which had a very
Oh,
strong
wow.
influence on me when I visited it a few years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and
I'm
so
jealous.
I try to widen the whole notion. What are we as Californians? Let's bring in this. This is a very important aspect of North American and Central American history and mythology. So I just wanted to bring that in. I hope I didn't take up too much time in
No, no,
doing that.
no. And no, I love this. I love talking about California history. I love talking about, I mean, when I saw your book and I saw what you're saying, I'm like, I really want to cover this because, like we were talking about, I don't think it's well known. I think some people know it, but I don't think the California people really know their history, certainly not to the level of Texas. And there's a lot of important stuff that you were covering here. We were independent. Just for the public at home, Oaxaca is Oaxaca. So you're hearing the word Oaxaca. That is that word. That is indigenous spelling. I don't believe that's Spanish spelling. They're a ethnic group at the southern border of Mexico who were never actually conquered by the Aztec. So they kind of keep kind of a separate cultural history, although they're Mexican
Very good.
nationals. And they're also a matriarchal based society. You may notice them here in California, and they look just like Mexicans. But if you start talking to them, they're not a patriarchal based society. They're a matriarchal based society, which has a big influence on their culture.
Well, since you're talking about again diversity, certainly the area of Oaxaca has the greatest diversity of peoples, Zapotecs, Mixtecs, and so on, and a substantial number of Zapotecs did come. I gave some references in my article. Did come to Southern California, to Los Angeles. They've set up hotels, restaurants, and so on. So it's not as if there's no connection. There's a very good connection.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
part of California is Zapotec presence, which is Oaxaca. Just to put that in.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And check out Alameda Island. I think both of us agreed that Alameda Island next to down.
For sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, we're going to meet there, right?
We're going to meet there, and we're going to enjoy
Whenever-
California diversity and coffee. We'll end it there. I'll ask you to.
Whenever you come, let me know, and I'll be free at any time.
I was going to end the show, but I wanted to ask you one question after I end the show. If you could hang back for a second.
Sure.
Okay. We're going to end the show. Thank you for being here. Thanks for checking it out. Here is the book. The article, Cosmic California Towards José Vasconcelos, Cosmic Race and Its Aesthetic Era, by the professor in the book California History, Winter 2023, Volume 100, Number 4. That's where you can find it. Check it out. I read it. Fascinating article on California's history. Covers a lot of stuff that we don't know, we don't talk about, and what it means for us at a cultural level. Personally, dear to my heart, I jumped on it the moment I saw it. I'm not just saying that.
Marvelous.
Leave it there.
Nothing like a reader like you, I must say.
It's just sad because the the Mexican sides from Texas, they all know Texas history. They all know Texas independence. And you brought up a good reason why. Those were the Americans versus the original indigenous population. But it's just sad. You see them; they're very aware of their history, and we have like almost no idea. It's literally cartooned and whitewashed to just everything was fine, everything was wonderful. There was just a vote, and democracy happened, and then California joined a democracy, and yay, end of story. And you're like, that is not what happened, and what happened is completely anathema to how we view ourselves today. Why can't we teach our children that? I'll leave it there. Okay, we'll end it there, and I have a question for you after the show. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Always wonderful to chat with you. And I got a lot of information from you, which I'm going to go into now.
Sorry.
No, I'm happy to.
I always love these talks. Okay, that's it, folks. We'll end the show, and we'll have another show very soon with, I believe, Ambassador Stephen Hagelman. See you soon.